Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition of the Inmate Alliance Insider. This is where you come to find the truth about what's going on with the Federal Bureau of Prisons and important information for those who are still inside, and maybe important information for those of us who have been out for a while. So without further ado, I'm the one they call the old guy, and lots to get to this week, so stay with me here for the next half hour and find out what's going on. I want all of you to remember the name Frederick Bardell. Fred's treatment by the crack BOP medical staff is something many of us are familiar with. Now, isn't that right, Scott? Do you hear me? And in light of a pending Supreme Court decision involving medical malpractice versus deliberate indifference, I think this is pretty significant. Mr. Bardell was a prisoner whose medical and release mistreatment by the Federal Bureau of Prisons were acts as described by U.S. District Court Judge Roy Dalton, who's in the Middle District of Florida, in an October 2022 order that the BOP was indifferent to human dignity. You hear that? Indifferent to human dignity. I think that's a very important distinction as we move forward here. Fred was housed at FCI Seaganville, where he developed an intestinal mass that turned into metastatic colon cancer. Although a BOP medical expert determined that Fred had a high likelihood of having colon cancer with likely metastasis to the liver, the BOP did nothing. Do you hear that? The BOP's crack medical staff did nothing. I can still, in my mind, see the federal prosecutor telling my judge that the BOP's medical facilities and treatment were just top-notch. How that person could stand there and say that is absolutely defies logic. But at any rate, I think it happened to many, many of us. An outside specialist said later that if Fred had gotten prompt treatment when the mass first was found, he would have had a 71% chance of recovery. I'd take those odds. But prompt treatment is simply not how the BOP rolls. As reported at the time, Fred's first compassionate release motion was denied after the BOP falsely, you hear that? Falsely assured the court that Fred could receive adequate care and custody. Boy, I've heard that somewhere before. My goodness sakes. But let's continue. Judge Dalton later wrote, as we now know, it was not true that Mr. Bardell could receive adequate care and custody, and regrettably, his condition was indeed terminal. And it just, what's the recourse here? I mean, how do you hold these people accountable when they do things like that? That's where I'm saying that this medical malpractice versus deliberate indifference case that's currently working its way through court, actually, I think it's waiting for a decision, actually comes into play here. But anyways, Fred's second compassionate relief motion, filed 3 months later, supported by an affidavit from an oncologist that Fred was likely dying of cancer, was granted. The court ordered him released as soon as the probation office and Fred's attorney worked out a release plan. Of course, the BOP didn't wait for a release plan. After forcing Fred's parents to pay $500 for an airline ticket, the BOP dumped Fred, who by then was skin and bones, wheelchair dependent, and bladder and bowel incontinent, on the airport curb without even a wheelchair. Can you imagine that? I mean, where do these people that work for the BOP, where do they come from? And Director Mitchell, this is the problem. This is in your ranks. This is something that you're working on. This is your problem. You are killing people. Your staff is, you're not, but your staff is killing people. And this man is proof to the pudding. Scott Phelps is proof. Denying people treatment, Eugene Sisco is proof. And it goes on and on and on that these people are evil. Not only incompetent, these people are evil. How could you do that to a man in that bad a shape? It just defies logic. Only with the aid of strangers was Fred able to get on the plane, change planes in Atlanta, and arrive, his clothes soaked with blood and feces, in Jacksonville. His parents took him straight to the hospital, where he died 9 days later. That's sad. That is so terrible. That in the United States of America, that we have people so evil that happens. And it doesn't happen just every once in a while. It is the rule rather than the exception. Letting people get so bad that by the time they get released and get back, that they're in such critical condition that they're, by the grace of God, some are alive. This kind of thing brings me to tears, because it is just so outrageous for this to happen in the United States of America. And this happened in 2022, which was under an alleged reformer's watch. You know, some woman from Oregon comes on, I'm a reformer, I'm compassionate. That's horse feces, horse crap, because this kind of thing happens all the time. Needless to say, unfortunately, Judge Dalton was absolutely outraged, holding the Seaganville warden in contempt of court, not for the negligent medical care, but for the heartless way prison dumped Fred at the airport. Well, he should have done it both ways, because I mean, this is unconscionable in this country. The BOP as an institution, and Warden Zook, this is I believe the statement by the judge, as an individual should be deeply ashamed of the circumstances surrounding the last stages of Mr. Bardell's incarceration and indeed his life. No individual who is incarcerated by the order of the court should be stripped of his right to simple human dignity as a consequence. And as we all know, the guys that are listening to me and who listen to me regularly, this is not the exception, folks. And if you're new to this, this is the rule. This happens all the time. The judge found that the BOP's actions were inconsistent with the moral values of a civilized society and unworthy of the Department of Justice of the United States of America. And yet, I will bet you 10-1. I'll bet you, as I sit here today, that there are still U.S. attorneys who will sit there and tell a judge, any judge who will listen, that the medical care at the Federal Bureau of Prisons is just good, very good, when in fact it is absolutely nonsense. In fact, the special master appointed by Judge Dalton confirmed that prison officials allowed an incarcerated man to waste away from highly treatable cancer and misrepresented key facts about his health care to the court. After that, the judge referred the matter to the Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General, as well he should. I mean, it goes on all the time. This is, as I'm saying, this is not the exception to the rule. This is the rule. This is incompetence and pure evil at its finest. I mean, these people, these medical staffers, the incompetence and the attitude they take is just ridiculous and outrageous. Recently, the Inspector General concluded that serious failures by multiple levels of staff at Seaganville led to Fred's death from colon cancer. The OIG, Inspector General's office, identified job performance and management failures at multiple levels within Stephenville, from line staff through the warden. He also identified problems with BOP's medical care of inmates, handling of compassionate relief requests due to medical circumstances, and handling of compassionate release orders. That is what happens when wardens and other administrative staff are promoted to the beyond the level of their incompetence. As I keep saying, the warden at FCI Ashland had been the corrections officer in charge of the rec center. But how does that make him competent and capable to be warden? The man was an idiot and a nitwit, and braggadocio about how he had never granted a compassionate release to anyone. This is what happens when you have people like that working for you. And Director Mitchell, I hope at some point in the future I get this program amped up enough that I can interview you for this program, because I support you. But man, you are rolling a 2-ton rock up a steep hill, and you're getting stymied every step of the way. This is awful. This is outrageous. This is ridiculous. And it's amazing. The Inspector General found that severe understaffing led to 6 months of delays in scheduling a colonoscopy for Fred, despite symptoms, tests, and scans showed that he likely had advanced colon cancer. They do that all the time, Inspector General, all of the time. I can't tell you how many times they canceled my appointment to the urologist because I had prostate cancer. And I was supposed to see a specialist, and they canceled it and canceled it and canceled it. And despite my concerns, they didn't care. They just didn't care. And that's the incompetence and the evil of the people that are working for you, Director Mitchell. The incompetence and the evil of these people. And after Fred's condition worsened, staff denied his request for compassionate release without fully reviewing his medical records, and then misrepresented the adequacy of treatment he was receiving to a federal judge. These people, prosecutors, prison officials, they lie all the time, and they'll lie right to the judge's face. Heck, they'll lie to the jury, standing right in front of them, looking square in the eye, and lie to them. This is the norm. And this, Director Mitchell, this President Trump, this is the kind of garbage that has to change. And if it's this bad with the BOP, can you imagine how bad it is with other federal agencies? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. This isn't just one agency. This is through the entire government. The waste, fraud, the abuse, the incompetence, and dare I say, the pure evil that's involved with these people is just unbelievable. When the judge finally ordered Bardell's release, no fewer than 9 BOP officials and employees failed to read the court's order and thus violated the judge's directive to wait until a release plan had been approved. They just do what they want to do. They don't care. They could care less about what a judge wants. They're going to do what they're going to do. It doesn't make a darn bit of difference. The report said, this is the Inspector General's report, the hastiness of the BOP's handling, this is the judge saying this, the hastiness of the BOP's handling of Bardell's release was extremely concerning because the BOP did not take measures to ensure his safe and compassionate transport in light of his medical condition. Again, just incompetence and pure evil. Isn't that just ridiculous? The OIG also said that the BOP's handling of Fred's request for a reduction in sentence was deficient and the government's related representations to the court that there was no indication that Bardell could not receive adequate care in custody were inconsistent with what we learned during the course of our investigation and review. And it happens day after day after day to thousands of federal prisoners. Those of us who are out, and no doubt those who are still there. You know, the incompetence of the medical staff is just, you can't imagine. I mean, you simply cannot imagine what it's like if you have never been there. It's just, it's awful. You know, that a compassionate release is unnecessary because there is no indication that an inmate cannot receive adequate care in custody is one common to government opposition to medical condition compassionate release requests. And it's one of the foundations of compassionate release, and that you have clowns like my warden who boasted about having never authorized a compassionate release. You know, the Inspector General tears the fig leaf from these misrepresentation. In Fred's case, the Inspectors General of Court found that the government's inaccurate representations were the result of the government's reliance on the BOP's reduction in sentence decision. Not the facts, just that their decision. They're just not going to release anybody. They don't have to, and they're not going to do it. Which we found to be based on a seriously deficient process within the BOP. And Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Chang's honest, although non-expert understanding of the limited records provided by the BOP. While we believe it would have been prudent for Chang to consult with BOP medical professionals, that's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? BOP medical professionals, other BOP employees, or other medical experts who better understand the BOP's medical records, Bardell's medical condition, and the BOP's ability to care for him. We noted that department procedures in place at the time did not require her to speak with such individuals. It didn't require the U.S. attorney to consult with BOP officials? Then how do you know? How do you have a clue? You're relying on what they sent you? And you're so naive as to believe that what they're sending you is actually adequate and accurate? My goodness. I mean, you know, this is kind of like they went that way, you know? One went east and one went west. I mean, this is ridiculous. These are supposed professionals who are incompetent. And dare I say, I'm going to use the term again, they are just evil people. You know, the BOP doesn't want anybody dipping into their little secrets. You know, and fortunately, because those of us who have been or are currently in a federal prison, well, we deserve what we got. Well, not necessarily, folks, because they lie, they cheat, they steal, they're evil. And I don't know that there's an honest one in the group, those who have served as U.S. attorneys. And, you know, unfortunately, despite the best efforts of Director Mitchell and the central office these past 7 months, and he's got a lot of his own people in there now, many case managers are still not following, after a year, are still not following the directives of the director to fully stack all available sentence credits under FSA and Second Chance Act. Worse yet is the extremely common practice of prisoners being told by case managers that they must stay in prison longer than their home confinement eligibility date, despite the fact that they have a U.S. probation-approved address to be released to. They do what they want to do. Again, they're evil. incompetent and evil. And this refusal to follow the director's memos on these subjects cost taxpayers millions of dollars and thousands of prisoners the opportunity to get home. Get home, start being productive again, help support their family. Because one of the untold things here is that, especially if you're on Social Security, the Social Security Administration stops your Social Security payments when you're incarcerated. Well, you don't need it because they're feeding you, they're housing you, they're giving you medical care. More evil. That's my money. That's your money. And yet they feel entitled to make decisions like this so that you can just go out and lose everything, your vehicles, everything, your personal property, your pets, everything that you can possibly imagine. This is the kind of stuff that they do. This is Social Security being jerks, being evil. They think it's their money. It is not their money. This is not an entitlement. We paid into Social Security all those years. And it still exists. Many prisoners with approved addresses still feel compelled to list themselves as homeless to get an easier release date. It's stupid. And we've heard again and again that case managers still use the tired excuse that halfway houses are full, when in fact they are not. That's the excuse they use with me. Oh, halfway house is full. No, it wasn't. And the judge didn't want to listen. The judge didn't care. Nobody cared, because the regional reentry manager, who was not in the office, who you couldn't find, who you couldn't contact, simply wasn't going to do it. And I don't know why. That's her job. And she did it so poorly and with so much malice and evil. And then when someone finally got a hold of her, her concern was not that she'd screwed up. Her concern was, how'd you get this number? Isn't that amazing? That's just outrageous that kind of stuff goes on. Many prisoners, I got that. And then we heard again the past week that many case managers still use that excuse that halfway house is full, or that the RRM or halfway house is fault that the final date is several months after the date originally promised, which happened to me. And they do it without a second thought. I think a couple weeks ago I went on the cost to house a prisoner is just about $50,000 a year. The cost to have a prisoner on home confinement is about $5,000 a year. So from an economic standpoint, it makes sense. The one of the common things is that the prisons are understaffed and that kind of thing. Well, if you're understaffed, then you need to balance the prison population with the staff. And only by getting people out of there can that happen. It's like getting the 8,000 vets currently housed in federal prisons into the VA instead of in federal prisons, or getting the 20,000 plus people who are here illegally or are eligible to be deported, sending them back to their home country, let them house them instead of housing them here. Or the approximately 60,000 federal inmates currently eligible for home confinement or halfway houses. So it's the ability to reduce the population from 160,000 to under 100,000 is certainly there. And because the director is getting no cooperation from the rank and file, from the people who run these facilities, it's a mess. And then finally, one of the things that I wanted to touch on, it's time for a national discussion on the concept of restorative justice. And this impacts a number of us. Me, Stan, Scott, many, many others who were there for alleged financial crimes. This is important. This is a means of responding to harm, including criminal offenses, through active accountability and repair rather than through passive punishment and isolation. While restorative justice has demonstrated potential to meaningfully improve processes and outcomes for individuals and communities, the implementation of restorative justice programs to address crime have been slow, limited, and misplaced. Well, when you got a bunch of U.S. attorneys and other involved in the criminal justice system who are evil and who really don't care, does that make, it just proves my point. Programs are often directed at low-level, nonviolent offenses that involve little, if any, cognizable harm. The approach creates two problems. One, it risks net widening, which is bringing more citizens under criminal surveillance and incarceration control for minor offenses. And two, it increases the research showing that restorative justice, is more necessary and more effective in areas where serious harm is incurred. It is time to grasp restorative justice's third rail, to consider how and where it is being used in the criminal system, and to explore what restorative justice would offer in the pursuit of more effective and equitable responses to violent crime and nonviolent crime. Because, you were conspiring with somebody else, well, you're as liable as they were. That should not be how this whole thing works. And unfortunately, it is how this whole thing works. And it's just such a shame that the ability to get things done, the ability to hold people accountable, the ability of the director to implement the reforms and upgrade this whole system, it's just unbelievable. The prosecutors lie to the court. The court has no idea. The BOP is covering their you-know-whats, covering their incompetence, and the whole system is broken down, and it is so unfortunate. There are so many other ways that things could be handled. And the first part of it is something that I have said many, many times. From the criminal justice system, it is not about convictions. It is about the truth. That's Truth. Truth. Maybe they ought to try it for a change. Maybe they ought to give it a whirl and see what happens doing the truth. They might find that the whole system improves. You have, and I will add one thing here in this light of what's going on these days. You have the right to free speech. You have the right to express your opinion, your views. You do not have the right to be violent. And I think it's about time people remember that. You want to stand on the street corner and protest, you go right ahead. That's a basic foundation of this country. But when you start threatening people and when you commit violence, then your right to free speech ends. So, folks, that's just about it for letting me rail and become emotional at some of these things, especially Mr. Bardell. And Mr. Bardell, to his family, if anybody knows him, you're not alone. This goes on day after day after day in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So with that, it's all for today, folks, and I want to thank you for listening. I want to express my sincere thanks to WBGU 88.1 FM for allowing me this time to express my views. And remember that unlike the brutal treatment that we received and that prisoners continue to receive, now that we're out, be sure to treat each other with compassion, respect, and kindness. I'm also going to direct you to my website. That would be www.inmatealliance.org. or you can email me. And if anybody knows Ken Jackson, you can give him my email address. It's backwards@myyahoo.com. That's backwards@myyahoo.com. Folks, thanks for listening. I'll be back in a couple of weeks with more news on what goes on in the brutal world of the BOP. Thank you again, and see you in a couple of weeks.